Roadblock, a haunted library production. It was 2:45 a.m. when I mashed on the brake, seeing the roadblock ahead. I had gotten restless around 2 a.m. and had decided to go to the store for a fountain drink and bag of chips. Up until then, my Friday night, which had led into Saturday morning, had been uneventful, and I was lounging at the house watching Netflix. I had been doing about 50 miles per hour and barely seen the roadblock before almost slamming into it. It was pretty strange to encounter a roadblock for no apparent reason this time of morning on a road that I had been driving for years. There was no flood, it was December, and it had recently snowed a few inches. Irritated, I decided to get out of my car and investigate. Looking back on it, that was a big mistake, considering I'm a 5'4", 21-year-old female who weighs 110 pounds. I'm pretty much helpless. There was one vehicle parked directly behind the row of cones and one barricade piece in the middle with flashing red lights. This car looked like a Crown Victoria from the front and had police lights on the top. The cherries were on, but I didn't see an officer in sight. That's when I noticed the car in the ditch to my left. It looked like it had been pulled over to the side, but I assumed it could have slid on black ice. Maybe this was the reason for the roadblock, I had thought? Hazardous road conditions? Who knows? But even though it was below freezing, the road was dry, and I hadn't encountered any black ice. Besides, a little black ice wouldn't close off a road at 3 a.m. This dawned on me as I cautiously approached the police car behind the cones. That's when I was grabbed from behind and lifted up in the air, swung around, and was now being carried to this car. I screamed, struggling in his grip, but the man was strong, and his grip was tight, as he squeezed my shoulders together so tight I thought that I would snap in two. The man was facing me, walking backwards, and I had been lifted off the ground. I had not yet saw his face, only his forearms that were pressed around my chest. I continued to kick and scream, my cries and pleas lost in the dense mountain range that surrounded both sides of the road. Then I was shoved into the back seat of the car. He told me before slamming the door that if I tried to escape at any time, I would be shot. I was thrown face first into a decaying body. I screamed, lifting my head to stare into the hollow eye sockets of a dead woman. My lungs and nose filled with a pungent odor of rotted flesh and death that instantly nauseated me. The car was thrown into gear as it accelerated, tossing me against the door. I pleaded for the man to stop because I was going to be sick. I guess he didn't mind having a decaying corpse in his back seat, but he didn't want any vomit because he pulled the car over. I opened the door and got out. I bent over and threw up. The stench had been overwhelming. Then I threw up again. My body had already begun to go into shock from being kidnapped and tossed into a car with a corpse. My stomach couldn't take it. The man got out of the car and stood over me. I saw his shoes as I wiped spittle from my mouth. I slowly stood straight and looked at him for the first time. He was over 6 foot and clean cut. He had a buzz cut for a haircut, and he had all the marks of a man who could have been handsome had he not been sick in the head. But his eyes were void of any emotion. They were empty of empathy. I had never before seen a person look so heartless. He wore blue jeans and a blank black short-sleeved shirt. "Get the hell in the car!" he yelled, gritting his teeth, pointing to the back seat. I was in no position to make a run for it the way I felt. I was shaky, dizzy, and nauseated. Despite this, I still tried. I made a frantic dash around the other side of the car and tried to sprint back to my own car. I was halfway there when he caught me and again dragged me back to his fake patrol car. I kicked and screamed more frantically than I did the first go-around, dreading that back seat. I had a few seconds to scream as loud as I could, hoping somebody near would hear me, before I was again thrown into the back seat as the door slammed shut. When he got in the car, he showed me his gun, reaching around the back seat and dangling it in my face. "Try that again and see what happens. Now shut up, we're going for a drive." I sat straight, stiff, my stomach turning, my heart racing, as the car took off again. He had reversed and went the opposite direction of the roadblock. It was hard to hold back tears, as I knew this could be my last night alive. I was so mad at myself for leaving the safety of my car, or not turning around when I had the chance. We took a turn in the road, and the corpse fell over with the turn, its head flopping in my lap. The back of the woman's head had a few strings of hair that had not yet fallen out. I could see neck bones as most of the flesh from the neck had decayed. I screamed and shoved it back against the door on its side. The head rattled the window, bones cracked and popped. It was half decomposed. Again, the smell of decaying flesh overwhelmed me. I held my nose and sobbed. I looked out the window and seen that we were on Zero Mountain, a remote area just outside the Kiamichi mountain range. Nobody came up here, and if they did, they lived here. I looked over to see the jaw of the corpse open as it swayed with every turn of the car. I began to plead for my life, freaking out. I begged him to let me go, but he drove on, ignoring my desperation. Unless I wanted to look like this person beside me, I knew that I needed to make another run for it, or I was going to meet the same fate. I waited until the car slowed down around a turn. I opened the door and jumped. With the car still moving, I nearly fell on my face. I twisted my ankle slightly and jarred my shoulder, but my adrenaline and sheer will to live blocked the pain as I rolled into the ditch. I was covered in snow and mud. The brake lights to the car lit up the road. I watched as the car came to a stop on the opposite side of the road. I needed to run, now. I was a good 25 feet from the car and cloaked in darkness. Only my sound would give me away at this point, unless he had a flashlight. I began up the hill slowly and deliberately. I heard the car door shut and footsteps fall across the road as I ascended the hill. The hill was steep, with small trees every few feet that I gripped for support and leverage. I heard the man say he was going to kill me if he caught me, but I knew that was his plan anyhow had I not jumped. His last victim in the car was proof. The motor of his car hummed as I continued my climb. He had left his car running. I knew that if he had any sense at all, he would soon have to abandon the pursuit and go back to the car before he drew attention to the situation. But then again, setting up a roadblock in the middle of nowhere at these hours of the night didn't indicate that this guy had any sense. I had to assume that he wouldn't abandon the chase and would keep chasing me, so I continued on, ignoring my burning chest as I gasped for air. The climb up this hill was exhausting. I could hear the creep edging closer. I guess he could hear me. I decided to stop to catch my breath, clinging to a small tree that was barely big enough to hold my weight. If I were to lose my balance, I'd tumble down this hill to my death. I tried to calm my breathing. I listened. I heard him, but his footsteps were growing distant now to my relief. He was descending the mountain. He had given up and was headed back to his car, like I was hoping he would do. By the time I heard the car drive off into the night, my breathing had slowed. I was still in shock because I was shaking. Though it was cold outside, my trembling wasn't because of the night chill. It was because of this whole experience. I felt like I needed to be in the ER. I would have done anything for a Valium at that moment. I was left with the silence of the night and a cool wind that whipped across my face. And now the night chill was beginning to break through my hoodie. I needed to get back down the hill. I slowly and carefully made my way down, tree by tree, using the moon's light as my guide. I finally made it down to the ditch. I debated walking the road, paranoid that he would drive back this way. I had no choice. I was cold and I needed to get back to my car that still had my keys in the ignition and was running. But I was probably 2 miles away, and it was going to be a long, cold walk. Not a single car passed me on my way back. My feet were freezing and I couldn't wait for the warmth of my car, and I hoped that nobody had driven by in the last 30 minutes and robbed me blind of everything I had in the car. But on the same token, I didn't care. I was alive, and that was the most important thing. When I made it back to the car, the roadblock was still there, and my car was still running. I had never been so happy to get into my car. I drove straight to the police station and made a report, then was driven to the hospital where I had to be calmed with a benzodiazepine. I was released after 4 hours, but I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't sleep well for the next few months because of nightmares. I've been on anxiety medicine ever since, and counseling, and now I don't trust anybody. It's been a year since I was kidnapped. No trace of him or his car has ever been found. It sickens me to know he's still on the loose somewhere. Police suspect that the dead body in his car was that of a 24-year-old female that had been missing for a year in the town I live in. Sadly, her body is still missing, and her parents were given the unsettling news. I guess it was some type of closure, even though it was a terrible closure to have. Unlike me, she had not been as fortunate. To know that I would have ended up just like her, dead and rotting, riding in the back seat of his bogus police car, still sends a certain chill through me that will probably never leave me. The thought of him driving around the cold, dark streets at night with a body in the back seat and that stench, that disgusting smell, it was all horrifying and disturbing. If I ever see a late-night roadblock again, I am going to plow straight through.